Good day, students, and welcome back to our fourth lesson of our topic, development. To start with, I would like to recap what we did last lesson. Okay, last lesson we studied that GNP is measured in a country's currency, but we need to convert to a common currency of which is US dollars in order to compare it with other countries' GNPs. We also understood that HDI is the summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions of human development, which means a long life, a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and have a decent standard of living. We also understood that GNP and HDI are two common indicators of development used in geography. And a country's wealth is measured using GNP per capita figures. Now, following the lesson, you had to complete a homework activity, and we'll be going through it before we move on to today's lesson. Okay, so we're going to correct our homework activity. So we had 3 questions in all, so we start with question 1. It said, using map 1, give the name of 2 countries, 1 with high GNP per capita, 2 with low GNP per capita, and 3 having GNP per capita ranging between $696 to $2,785. Second, research and name 3 countries with the highest HDI, which is your Human Development Index, and 3 with the lowest HDI for 2020. And the third one, why is HDI considered to be a better way than GNP in measuring levels of development? So let us have a look at map 1. So we had our map 1. Okay, we'll take question 1. Now, if we look for countries with high GNP per capita, now if you have mentioned any 2 of the countries I'm going to mention now, any 2 of the countries, then you can give yourself a mark. So, black star, we're going to give countries with high GNP per capita. So, let us see, Alaska, Canada, USA. If you've given any countries in Europe, such as Spain, UK and Ireland, or any of Britain, Iceland, Sweden or Norway or Finland, any of the 3, you still get your scores. If you give to France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Switzerland, and also Italy, you get your scores. You give yourself a tick. And over to Asia, if you mention Japan, here it is. If you mention Malaysia, okay, and over Oceania, if you mention Australia, and if you mention New Zealand, is also correct as countries with high GNP per capita. Oh, and I forgot South Africa over Africa, also for high GNP per capita. Now we move on to number 2, to the other part of question 1, countries now with low GNP per capita, and for that we use a purple star. I've used a purple star. So, as I mentioned the countries, if you have put any 2 of the countries I'm going to mention, then you have scored correctly. So let us see. Okay, so if you see most of the countries in Africa, most of the countries from the African continent are with low GNP per capita. So what are these countries? So if you mention countries from West Africa, namely Liberia, Sierra Leone, Chad, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, and in the East, if you mention countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. And to the south and central, if you mention countries like Central African Republic, Congo, Zambia, Lesotho, and also if you mention Madagascar. And if we move on to the north of Africa, okay, if we mention countries like Egypt, Chad, South Sudan, North and South Sudan, Mali, then you give yourself a mark. Over to Asia, if we mention countries like Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then we move on to India, China, Mongolia, Vietnam, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and if you mention also Philippines and Indonesia, as well as Papua New Guinea, then you have scored correctly. And over to Europe. Let's see our purple stars over Europe. Yes, it's mostly in the eastern part of Europe. So we're talking about countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Monrovia, Bulgaria, and Greece. Now, on the other hand, if we move over to the Americas, we see a little bit there in Central America. So these countries are namely Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, San Salvador, and Nicaragua. Now the third part of our question 1, countries having GNP per capita ranging between $696 to $2,785. Now these countries are also known as the medium-low GNP per capita. So we see our green star. Okay, so green star, we see over to South America. If you mention countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, and over to Europe. If you mention Spain, I see only, sorry, Portugal. If you mention Portugal, yes. And over Asia, anybody? Yes, very good. I see Saudi Arabia. I see Oman. I see also Thailand. Okay. And lastly, over Africa, anybody? Yes, very good. I see Senegal. I see there is Senegal. Top there, it's Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. Then to the central part, we see Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Congo. And then to the southwest, I see Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. Okay. Okay, so we continue with our homework activity. Now we move on to question 2, where you have to research and name 3 countries with the highest HDI and 3 with the lowest HDI for 2020. And remember that we discussed last lesson that HDI is broken down into 4 tiers: the very high human development, the high human development, the medium human development, and the low human development. So here we are looking at the highest, the very high human, 0.8 to 1.0, and the lowest, which is the low human development, below 0.55. And for that one, I have a table. So you check your countries, and I've taken this information from the Human Development Report Office from UNDP for 2020. Okay, so let us see highest HDI and lowest HDI. So according to the report, number 1 on the HDI value of 0.957 is Norway, and followed by Ireland, followed by Switzerland. As you notice, Switzerland and Ireland both are second place. So the next one is fourth place, Hong Kong. Look at the value. Iceland, Germany, again Hong Kong and Iceland are at the same level with 0.949 HDI value. Germany next, sixth. Seventh is Sweden. Eighth is Australia, and Australia shares the same place as Netherlands with HDI value 0.944. And 10th place is Denmark with HDI value 0.940. Now if we look at the lowest HDI, the lowest, we start with 189th rank, that is Niger, with a value of 0.394. As you notice, 0.394 matches our low human development, which is below 0.55. And this follows the lowest. We have Central African Republic at the 188th rank. Okay, before that we have Chad. Look at the values, it's still below 0.55. Then South Sudan. South Sudan and Burundi shares the same rank, 185 and 185th. Mali at 184th. Sierra Leone and Burkina Faso at 182. 100. Sierra Leone and Burkina Faso both at 182nd place. Mozambique, and then also if you mention Eritrea, you have scored correctly. Okay? Now if you want to see other countries, you can check online, you can do your research, more research, and you can obtain this table. And I checked for Seychelles for 2020. Seychelles was ranked 67th with a HDI value of 0.796, which makes our country a country with a high human development, which means the second one, which means we fall between 0.7 to 0.79. Okay? So we fall in the third tier. Whereas Mauritius, I checked, it was at the 66th rank. Okay, so we move on to question 3, where we were asked to why HDI is considered to be a better way than GNP in measuring levels of development. So as we studied in lesson 2 and 3, okay, HDI is considered a better way because HDI shows a more holistic picture of a country than GNP. HDI includes economic and social indicators which reduces anomalies. Okay, and HDI has a greater emphasis on human development and not just economic development as GNP. And HDI also takes into account quality of life and not just production capacity of a country. So there you go, your economic development. Now, so today's lesson, we're going to compare and contrast the economic and social development of MEDCs and LEDCs. Okay, so for the 3 lessons we've done before, we have talked a lot about MEDCs and LEDCs. Now we're going to see the patterns and also the characteristics that compare the two. Okay, first we're going to check the patterns of development. Now geographers are always interested in differences in the levels of development and rates of growth, either between countries or within a country. And also they try to map the differences to see if there is a pattern. They try to look for characteristics whereby they can measure differences, and they try to explain the causes and effects of the differences in development. Now I'm going to show you a map, which is the simplest and most commonly used map to show the differences in development. Okay, so this is your map. You can find it in your book as well. Okay, your WOF. Now, if we look at this map, you can see that the world is divided into two groups. The more economically developed countries, okay, with the green arrow here, the more economically developed countries, the MEDCs, as we've seen earlier, which includes the richer, more industrialized countries of the so-called developed north. Okay, so this is your developed north, which is above the red line here. Now, if we look closely at this red line, the green arrow here, we can see the developed north, but also note that even if Australia is to the south, here is Australia and New Zealand, they fall into the southern hemisphere, they still form part of the developed north. And then we have what we call the less economically developed countries, the LEDCs. Okay, here with the yellow arrow. Now, these countries include they are the poorer, less industrialized countries, and they are so-called the developing south. Okay. About NICs and emerging countries, we won't look at it for now, but next lesson we're going to discuss about it in greater detail. Now, next geographers have suggested several methods by which development can be measured. So, we are going to see those methods. Okay. When we talk about characteristics of development, we talk about economic wealth, and then we talk also about the social indicators. But let's talk about the economic wealth first. Economic wealth is the traditional measure of development. We see economic wealth as the easiest way to compare places is to measure their wealth. And wealth of a country is measured by its, somebody? Yes, yes, okay, so gross development product per capita, or your GNP per capita. Very good. To many people living in industrialized countries such as UK or Canada, economic development tends to only be associated with growth in wealth. Now, the disadvantage of GNP or GDP, however, is that it does not show differences in wealth between people and places in a country. So, we have the social indicators, where it includes a wide range of social measures, namely population, where an example, in general, the MEDCs have lower birth rates and a slower natural increase than do the LEDCs. And another social measure, health, where MEDCs have lower infant mortality rate, a longer life expectancy, and fewer people per doctor than LEDCs. Now, apart from social and economic development, as we've seen here, there are other indicators which includes measures related to adult literacy, diet, employment structures, and energy consumption. Now, let us observe the next table showing the differences between MEDCs and LEDCs for the different indicators as discussed here. Okay, so we have a table. We're going to see now, as we've discussed, the differences between them in terms of economic, in terms of social, and the other indicators I mentioned earlier: education, diet, employment, energy, and trade. Okay, so let us see. For MEDCs, we start with economic GDP. Now, in MEDCs, the majority of their economies are over 5,000 US dollars per capita, which is 80% of the world's income. Whereas the LEDCs for economic, the majority are under 2,000 US dollar per capita, and it makes only 20% of the world's total income. For the social indicators, for the social measures, population, the MEDCs, we have a low steady birth rate, partly due to family planning. Another point in terms of population for MEDCs, there is a slow natural increase that takes 100 years to double. We are talking about population here. And 18% of the world's population. It makes up 18% of the world's population. When we look at the LEDCs now, it has a high birth rate. Most of the countries, the population, high birth rate, partly due to limited family planning, but falling. Relatively high death rate, but falling except for the sub-Saharan Africa. So we are talking about countries around the we say the Sahel regions of Africa. And then we have the rapid natural increase, where population doubles in 30 years. And the LEDCs also makes up 82% of the world's population. Next, we look at social, we look at health this time. For MEDCs, we see that there is low infant mortality rate, long and increasing life expectancy, mainly due to vaccines, large number of doctors and hospitals. So that is why there's the low and increasing life expectancy, and high standards of healthcare. If we look at LEDCs, it is high. The low infant mortality rate is high, though it is falling. And shorter life expectancy, especially in poorest countries. Also, there's relatively few doctors and hospitals compared to MEDCs, and there is little money available. So when we look at others in terms of other indicators and measures, we use education, where for MEDCs, majority have full-time education, and many of the students have 16 years of education and above, and most adults, including women, are literate. For the LEDCs on the other hand, there is a limited numbers of students getting full-time education, and few of them go on to further their education after 16 years. And there is low adult literacy rate, where women are disadvantaged. Okay, we look at diet as another measure. For MEDCs, the diet is rather balanced, and which includes several meals per day, and there is high protein intake. Compared to LEDCs, the diet is unbalanced, and 35% of children under 5 years are underfed, and the country is usually has low protein intake. Employment. For MEDCs, there are few jobs in the primary sector, more in the secondary, and most are in tertiary sector. And there is a lot of mechanization and technology. Whereas LEDCs, most of the employment is in the primary sector, very few in the secondary and tertiary sectors, and there's limited mechanization and technology. In terms of energy now, MEDCs compared with LEDCs, MEDCs have high levels of consumption, mainly coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear power, and they use 70% of the world's energy, whereas LEDCs only use 30% of the world energy, and they have low levels of consumptions, which often they rely mostly on firewood. In regards to trade, as another measure, if we look at MEDCs, there is large volume and value, mainly manufactured goods. And LEDCs, very small volume, value, and they are mainly unprocessed raw materials. So if we notice, many of these criteria are themselves related to wealth of a country. Example, if the country is more wealthy, therefore it is economically developed. Notice, however, that many of these criteria are themselves related to the wealth of a country. Example, the more wealthy the country is and economically developed, the more it can spend on healthcare, education, energy provision, and providing other services. Now, this suggests that a country has to increase its GDP if it is to improve the standard of living and quality of life of its inhabitants. So we have come to the end of our lesson. What did we learn today? Today we compared and contrasted the economic and social development of MEDCs and LEDCs. We found out that even if finding the economic wealth is the easiest way to compare places, the disadvantage of GDP and GNP, however, is that it does not show differences in wealth between people and places in a country. We also saw that apart from social and economic development, there are other indicators which include measures related to adult literacy, diet, employment structures, and energy consumption. Now, next lesson, we are going to define the term NICs and BRICs, and also we are going to list the countries that make up NICs, which are the newly industrialized countries as we saw in lesson 1, and we are going to look also at the BRICs, going to list the countries. I have now reached the end of lesson 4 in development, and I thank you for your attention. Remember, students, to keep following the guidelines from the Ministry of Education. Keep safe, and until next time, thank you and goodbye.